that trauma. There was a collective conspiracy, for lack of a better word, but a collective consensus to not talk that much about combat trauma after World War II, but I think probably because the whole country was traumatized by World War II. It was an all-in endeavor. And there was a desire to just simply move on and try to put the war behind us. There's evidence that veterans groups and even the government pressured the media not to publish stories about veterans having problems, to publish stories about veterans committing crimes, because they didn't want to stigmatize veterans, make it any harder for them to reintegrate, harder for them to get jobs. So there was a conspiracy of silence around the World War II generation that has given this mythology that somehow that generation didn't experience combat trauma. We now know that that's just simply not the case. And Dr. Shea, who in his career treated a lot of World War II veterans at the VA, talked with them extensively about this. And he talks in this quote about how there's still this untold history of the United States after World War II around the huge 3,000 to 5,000 bed neuropsychiatric asylums that were built in that era, primarily to house traumatized World War II veterans. And there are strikingly few records about what happened within the walls of those asylums. Those asylums have long been closed, and the secrets within those walls died within them. But many World War II veterans have reported to Dr. Shea that they were aware of those asylums, and they are aware of buddies who had raised their hands and asked for help who disappeared within the walls of those asylums, many of them never to emerge again. And they heard horror stories about the things that happened inside those asylums that deterred them from raising their hands and asking for help until decades later. Audie Murphy is an important figure to come out of World War II. First of all, he was the most decorated soldier, American soldier of the war. Came home with a Congressional Medal of Honor and pretty much every other medal you can imagine. Instantly a national hero, ticker tape parades, a Hollywood movie contract, went on to become the Brad Pitt of his generation. Starred in an endless stream of old westerns and war movies I remember seeing on late night TV when I was a kid, including a movie about himself in which he starred as himself. 20 years after he came home, though, in the mid-1960s, Audie started publicly speaking about his combat trauma. He publicly reported that he had slept with a loaded handgun under his pillow every night since he had come home from the war. He publicly acknowledged committing numerous acts of domestic violence on his 3 wives since the war, including one incident in which he drunkenly held a gun to his wife's head for hours one night, telling her he was going to kill her and then kill himself. And he called himself a chronic alcoholic and prescription drug addict. Audie went public when he did because in the 1960s he had followed a fad in Hollywood and all the stars were going to see shrinks. It was the thing to do. And he followed the fad and went to see a mental health professional and very quickly realized that there was a lot of benefit in it for him. And that he didn't have to live in this hell that he had spent the past 20 years in. And that so many of his buddies from the war had been in. And when he realized there was help available, and that the major barrier to getting it was the stigma that veterans and society attached to the condition, he felt duty-bound as the warrior's warrior, whose courage was beyond question, to go public with his own battle, and the fact that he had sought and received help for it. And he also felt duty-bound because at that time, there was a new generation of veterans coming home from this new war in Vietnam with exactly the same symptoms that Audie recognized in himself and in his buddies. And he felt duty-bound to do something to try to prevent them from experiencing the same thing. Unfortunately, the pressure that Audie put on the government, on the military, and the VA to do better by veterans didn't really gain traction until years after the Vietnam War. But he still deserves, I think, a huge amount of credit for starting to break down the stigma and the taboo around this issue.